The court is now in session. Today, the chamber continues to hear the remaining testimony of Prum Sarat and begins hearing testimony of another witness, that is 2TCW849. Ms. Ji Siu Huang, please report the attendance of the parties and other individuals at today's proceedings. Grefie, Mr. President, for today's proceedings, all parties to this case are present. Mr. Nuon Ji is present in the holding cell downstairs. He has waived his right to be present in the courtroom. The waiver has been delivered to the greffier. The witness who is to conclude his testimony today, that is Mr. Prum Sarat, as well as his duty counsel, present in the courtroom. Today we also have a reserve witness, that is 2TCW849, who took an oath yesterday. President, thank you, Mr. Ji Siu Huang. The chamber now decides on the request by Nuon Ji. The chamber has received a waiver from Nuon Ji, dated 27 January 2016, which states that due to his health, headache, and back pain, he cannot sit or concentrate for long, and in order to effectively participate in future hearings, he requests to waive his rights to participate in and be present at the 27 January 2016 hearing. Having seen the medical report of Nuon Ji by the duty doctor for the accused at the ECCC, dated 27 January 2016, which notes that Nuon Ji has chronic back pain and occasional dizziness when he sits for long, and recommends that the chamber grant him his request so that he can follow the proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs. Based on the above information and pursuant to Rule 81.5 of the ECCC internal rules, the chamber grants Nuon Ji his request to follow today's proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs via audio-visual means. The chamber instructs the AV unit personnel to link the proceedings to the room downstairs so that Nuon Ji can follow. This applies to the whole day. And the chamber would like to inform the interpreters in the booth. When any party of the proceedings use the term June, interpreter, please use the same term June in your interpretation, and if the party refers to Vietnamese, you should also refer to Vietnamese. Thank you. The floor is now given to the co-prosecutor to continue putting further questions to the witness. You may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, all the parties. And good morning, Mr. Witness. Yesterday, when we left off, we were talking about Khieu Samphan. Can you tell us whether you worked with Khieu Samphan after 1979? In the 1990s, and particularly up until his surrender in 1998.
Witness. In 1991, I worked with him.
Est-ce qu'à l'époque,
During that period, in 1991, were you a direct subordinate of Khieu Samphan?
President Counsel Angtaguse, you had the floor.
Oui, Monsieur.
Yes, Mr. President, I don't know where the co-prosecutor is going with this question. I note that this question on 1991 has to do with a date that is out of the temporary scope of the trial, so I would object to this question. Mr. President, this question is very relevant because it is aimed at ascertaining the ties the witness had with Kyo Sampan and to assess what he says regarding the accused. Can I proceed, Mr. President?
Yes, you can proceed.
Non, ma question, monsieur le
Witness, my question was whether in 1991 you were the direct subordinate of Kyo Sampan.
I was part of the security team that is for him. I also worked within the vicinity of the office where he worked.
Vous avez dit une petite phrase dans...
You uttered a small utterance, a sentence. Page 101 in English, and the ERN is 0097425354, and in Khmer it is on page 009264311032, and it's a document E3/9113, and this is what you stated, and I quoted in English.
Tricky, but I think he's a nice person. End of quote. Qu'est-ce que vous avez voulu dire en disant...
What did you mean when you said that Kyo Sampan was known to be tricky?
I don't think I use that term.
Bien, alors je n'insiste.
In that case, I will not insist. Yesterday, the defense used the record of interview of Yingret. It is spelled as Hiengret. Is it true that you are the person who gave the name and address of that person to DC Cam? Did you work with him in Division 164?
In fact, we used to be in the same unit, and when DC camp staff came to meet me, they asked me about the names and whether I knew where they lived, and indeed I told them to the best of my knowledge.
Est-ce que vous êtes resté un ami proche?
Did you continue to be a close friend of Yingret? And if you were to see him again, would you discuss, or did you discuss regularly whenever you met him, the events of democratic Cambodia?
Yingret and I were not close friends. To my understanding, close friends, it means we were actually close and we would die for one another. However, I had not seen him and I had not discussed with him regarding what happened under the regime. Councillor Copper, you have the floor.
An observation, Mr. President. Good morning.
it seems that the prosecution is referring to Hingrit's DC camp statement. That's a document that we would desperately like to have, but we don't have it. I don't think there is any English translation yet, so I was wondering whether the prosecution already has the English translation of this particular DC camp statement.
No, No, Mr. President. In the interview with DCCAM, this witness spontaneously gave the name of that witness, and I believe is it the DCCAM or the co-investigating judges who should be contacted for that. You talked of another friend called Chin, who was also from the East Zone, and he said he survived the time spent at Kampong Chang, where he was participating in the building of the airport. Do you know whether he committed an error or a fault in order to be sent there?
I did not know if he made any mistake. However, Chien worked at a separate location from where I worked, since I was on board a vessel. And I did not have any communication with the Chien at the time.
Hier, on a évoqué.
Yesterday, mention was made of the disappearance of the Deputy Commander of Division 164, Dern, and the defense recalled that he joined the division on the 21st of April 1977. Following his disappearance, did you note that soldiers from the east, among the 700 subordinates of Dern, that is, those in his circles, as was the term used at the time, do you know whether some of those his subordinates disappeared or were sent for re-education?
What I knew at the time was that them disappeared, and here referred to them, the deputy division commander, and I do not know where Anka sent him through. As I stated earlier, I was assigned to be stationed on a vessel and not onshore.
Bien, mais dans votre régiment.
Very well, but in your regiment, in your battalion, at the end of 1978, before the Vietnamese captured Cambodia, were there still many soldiers who hailed from the East Zone in the 140 regiment? Did you notice that there were still some left?
To my recollection, in early 1978, for the remaining forces, they were removed from the ship and they were placed on a shore, that is the regimental office or headquarters, and they were assigned the task by the headquarters directly, and I did not know the nature of those tasks.
Bien, j'en reviens.
Very well. I would like us to now talk of one of the training sessions conducted by Son Sen, as you stated yesterday. With the leave of the chamber, I would like to show you a document E3/847. This is a list of trainees who attended the second internship at the headquarters held on the 23rd of November 1976. And we have a number of names, 59 from Division 164 on that list. Mr. President, can I show the witness this document?
Yes, you may proceed.
Alors,
Very well. While the document is being shown to you, there are two numbers that are of interest to me on this list. Number 158, and there we read Comrade Kim Nyan, Nhann, commander of the regiment of Division 164. Is that the Nyan you mentioned yesterday as being a member of the committee of Division 164?
Công nhận yes, that statement is correct. This is the same công nhận that I mentioned in my interview.
et au numéro 200.
And that number 203, we have the name Prom Sarat. I believe that is your name. We flip over to the next page. You have number 203, and it is stated in English and in Khmer that you were company secretary. I believe there's an error in French because it's mentioned battalion secretary. Is that indeed you? Are you the person they are referring to here?
Yes, that is my name, the commander of a company.
Bon, ce document date de novembre 1000.
This document is dated November 1976. You had therefore already completed your training, your 6-month training in August 1976. Why were you still called company chief at the time? Were you not yet captain of the boat referred to as 17-10?
As part of the practice for the assistance to the office, I believe that is why my name was mentioned with my role as stated in the document.
En tant que chef de
As company chief, were you one of the members of the brigade committee?
Per my assignment, I was not part of the brigade committee. My function and role was to supervise a company of 100 forces. I had nothing to do with the division membership or committee. And as I stated, my function was at the company level.
Pardon, je n'aurais pas utilisé le mot brigade.
I didn't mean to use the word brigade. I meant to say the battalion committee that is immediately above the level of your company. I believe it was Battalion 44.
I was at the level of a company. And that was my role, that is to supervise a company. However, I was not a member of the battalion committee.
Monsieur le témoin, on en a fini avec le document.
Mr. Witness, I am done with that document.
Deputy Co-Prosecutor, please hold on. Judge Laverne, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I just wish to clarify something because I note that the three versions of this document are not identical. It is true that in French, mention is made of the fact that Comrade Prum Sarat was Secretary of the Battalion of Division 164. In the Khmer and English versions, there is simply a dash, and we can suppose that the dash means that they didn't want to reproduce the term used above, and that is company. That is quite ambiguous.
Merci. Je voudrais passer.
Thank you. I would like to move on to something else. You went to Phnom Penh. You attended a training session with Son Sen. Did you attend several training sessions with him, or you attended only one?
As far as I remember, I attended the study sessions 2 times, led by Sun Sen. That is one in 75 and the second one.
La première, c'était peut-être.
The first was perhaps in November 1976. Did you attend a meeting at which Son Sen talked about the fact that Sao Pim had been detained, bearing in mind that Sao Pim disappeared in 1978?
I cannot recall the time clearly, as these matters happened a long time ago. President intervenes. Witness, please hold on, and Counsel Antakuse, you have the floor.
Oui, Monsieur le...
Yes, Mr. President. I would like the prosecutor to clarify something, because the interpretation of the last question showed that the witness said he attended training session 1 in 1975. I didn't hear the date of the second training session, so I don't know where the group prosecutor got the second date. Perhaps he should clarify this point with the witness.
Just an observation in furtherance to what my colleague said. The document with the name of this witness on it is referred to as the second session. So the second General Staff Study session was on the 25th of November 76, implying there was a first one, indeed, in 75. Bon, Monsieur le Président.
Well, Mr. President, that is not accurate. The document makes reference to the first session in October 1976. That is what is on record. The second session is dated November 1976, and there are different persons who participated in that training session. The name is on the document titled First Session. In fact, I'm relying on what the witness said in answer 75 in E319/23.3.54, where he states, as you know, the number one enemy of democratic Cambodia was Vietnam. The enemy number 2 was the people who were gnawing into the country from within. I hear Son Sen talk about this when I was attending a training session at the headquarters in Phnom Penh. Son Sen announced that Sao Pim had been arrested. I believe Sapim disappeared in 1978, and I believe that was when you attended your second training session in Phnom Penh with Son Sen. Isn't that correct?
In fact, my statement at the time was that it was not a study session, but I received information via the general staff through the division, and then the division relayed that information to the lower levels concerning the situation that happened in 1978 in the East Zone, about the activities conducted by Sarpam, and I received that information through my upper level or chain of commands, that is the regimental level.
Est-ce que Son Sen
Was Son Sen or the cadres of Division 164, did they tell you that the number one enemy of Democratic Cambodia was Vietnam, but also that the Vietnamese were the hereditary enemies of the Cambodians? Did you ever hear that expression, hereditary enemies?
Through my recollection, the phrase was used, and I heard it since I was a child. I heard my grandfather use that phrase as well.
Now, regarding the hereditary enemies, I would like to read out to you what another witness said about this. This was witness 2 TCW 1000, and I'd like, with the leave of the chamber, provide to the witness the two first pages of the WRI E319 23.3.44, is so that the witness may possibly identify this person and say if he knows this person, and of course without speaking out his name, if that is possible. Mr. President, may I therefore provide to the witness both of these pages?
Yes, that you can do that.
Voilà, donc sans prononcer son nom.
So without speaking out his name, can you tell the chamber if you know this person within Regiment 140?
Est-ce que son nom vous dit quelque chose?
Does his name ring a bell? If you don't know this person, just simply tell us.
I do not know this person.
Je voudrais lire un extrait.
Well, I'd like to read out an excerpt of what he said at answers 31 to 33 of this WRI. And the topic that was discussed was the arrest of the Vietnamese. And the question was the following. As far as you are concerned, was it a good thing to execute all of the people who were arrested? TCW 1000's answer: I think that it was not a good thing to do, because these people were innocent. They were escaping, they were fleeing the war to save their lives, that's all. However, in the eyes of the Khmer Rouge of the time, the Vietnamese were hereditary enemies without any distinction. And a little bit further down, answer 32, contrary to the Thai, the Vietnamese were more antagonistic. This is why the Khmer Rouge considered the Vietnamese as hereditary enemies and as enemy number one. Question 33. How is it that you know this? Answer. Because the battalion and regiment chiefs studied with the division, and when they returned from studying, they spoke to us about all of this during a training session. End of quote, free translation.
Est-ce que vous avez entendu?
So did you hear the same thing as this witness regarding the fact that the Vietnamese were all considered hereditary enemies without any distinctions among them?
Answer. From what I heard, this term had something to do with Cambodian tradition, and I myself understood the situation of the enemies, namely Yuan.
À l'audience,
At the hearing of 16 December 2015, this document E1/69.1, the same witness at 1:35 and 54 seconds in the afternoon, so specified what follows regarding the content of this training session with the regiment chief of Regiment 140 and with the chief of his battalion. And I quote, "When we learnt about the hereditary enemy, nobody dared to question what we were being taught regarding the hereditary enemy. We had to listen to what was taught to us." Question, what did the teachers tell you exactly regarding the Vietnamese, the hereditary enemies? The witnesses answer, they told us to kill them, even if they were babies, because they were our hereditary enemy. So we had to kill them. Each battalion, therefore, was in charge of executing and implementing this order. End of quote.
et là aussi,
Here again, my question is the following. Did you hear the regiment chief of Regiment 140 or your battalion chief tell you that the Vietnamese had to be killed because they were your hereditary enemies?
Answer. He used to make that point very clearly. However, as I said, I had no responsibility concerning the tasks which were described in that document. I was in charge and on the vessel and also on the sea.
Of course, we are going to get back to this later. Did Son Sen or the cadres of Division 164 ask you to be vigilant when dealing with the possibility of spies coming into Cambodian territory, spies from Vietnam, or Vietnamese soldiers passing as refugees or as fishermen?
Answer. In fact, the situation at the time was that the orders and instruction over the radio communication to the vessels on territorial sea to be vigilant. It was meant for crew members to be in charge and responsible for the vessels. Regarding the enemies, the land borders was also the same case, that everyone was to be on vigilant.
You would listen to Radio Phnom Penh, that's what you told us yesterday, So did you hear any broadcasts dealing with the confessions of Vietnamese prisoners who were captured at sea in Kampong Som in 1978 in particular?
Answer. I forget it already. The study session at the time broadcasted the confession of the Vietnamese and also the Vietnamese soldiers in particular. I cannot recall when that broadcast was made available to all of us. It happened from the period of 1975 to 1978, if I am not mistaken.
Well, I would like to illustrate this point, that is to say, the infiltration or the possible infiltration of spies by reading out the content of a Radio Phnom Penh broadcast. It's document 1249. It's called The Confessions of a Vietnamese Sailor Who Was Captured, and the national radio broadcast what it called a broadcast on 29 January 1978 regarding Phu Tinh Ngo, VUTINHNGO, who was described as a former ensign of the Turkey Navy and who was captured on 3 January 1978. I did not yet put any questions, Mr. President.
President, you have the floor now, Counsel.
Yes. Maybe I'm a bit too quick with my objection, but I will still object, saying that I do not know if the co-prosecutor intends to use the content of this radio broadcast, but it appears to me that with regard to the Supreme Court's decision, of course, I'm not sure that the trial chamber has ruled on this, but if we're going to speak about the content of what is called a confession, there might be a problem with regard to the legality of the use of the content of this document. If I may answer, Mr. President, I do not intend to use the content to assert its truthfulness, but rather to demonstrate the use that was made of it for propaganda purposes against Vietnam. So it's only in this way that I intend to read out an excerpt of this radio broadcast. It's not sure, in fact, that this radio broadcast corresponds exactly to what the person might have said or not at S21. Well, then I think, says Counsel Guisset, there's a misunderstanding on the part of the co-prosecutor with regard to the decision of the Supreme Court, because the question is not what use we intend to make of the content of confessions or statements that are torture tainted, but once again, the co-prosecutor is telling us that these are confessions of people who apparently were arrested, and under these conditions, regardless of the reason for using this document, the parties are not allowed to use the content of such confessions. This was very, very clear. I understand that the co-prosecutor is telling us that he wants to use the document in a noble and more neutral way, but however, the content of anything that is torture tainted or possibly torture tainted in the case of confessions, whether it be confessions from people who are detained at S21 or elsewhere, is strictly forbidden. Well, just before you deliberate, it is the radio stating that these were Vietnamese confessions. It's not the document taken at S21 necessarily, and there are comments made before reading out these confessions that indeed were broadcast by the radio and not spoken by the person or by this Vietnamese person who was detained at S21.
President, we understand that the objection of the defense team is appropriate. These questions are not allowed to be put to the witness since they have something to do with the content of the confessions. So you have to be very careful regarding the presentation of the content of the confession on the radio broadcast.
Witness, you no longer remember the date when these confessions of Vietnamese prisoners were broadcast on the radio. Were the Vietnamese arrested at sea or on the islands sent to Phnom Penh to S-21 before the beginning of January 1978? That is to say, right after the Vietnamese retracted from Cambodia after having invaded Cambodia at the end of 1977. Were Vietnamese prisoners already being sent, Vietnamese prisoners who had been arrested at sea, already being sent to S-21?
Witness, I do not really get the question. Yes, in terms of the period of 1977 and 78. So could you please repeat it clearly to me again?
Yes. Were Vietnamese soldiers, spies, or civilians who had been arrested at sea or on the islands being sent to S-21 in 1977, or did this only start in 1978?
Answer. On the issue of sending the Vietnamese from sea to S-21, this information was learned by me over the radio communication that on that particular day, Vietnamese and Yuan had been arrested between the Tang and Polowai Islands and also at the Southeast Island. And we were instructed to be careful and vigilant since we had no information when we would receive the attacks, counterattacks from them.
Did you hear from your superiors in Division 164 that Vietnamese spies would put children on the boats in order for people to believe that they were refugees? That is to say, did spies try to hide among refugees, which included, in this case, children?
Answer. I never received such information because it was beyond my responsibility and task that I had to perform.
Concretely speaking, on the field, how would you implement what you were told in Division 164 and what you were told by the Army 8 headquarters, because you were told that the Vietnamese were the hereditary enemies of Cambodia, enemy number one? So were you asked to repress, to purge, and to eliminate these enemies?
Answer. In fact, I did not receive such orders. During the time that I was performing the tasks, as I said, I was engaged in the training and how to utilize vessels. So I had no obligation to those orders of how to deal with the Vietnamese.
However, I would like to read out what you said in your WRI at answer 115. The question that was put to you was the following: repressing or cleansing the enemies. Was this something that was provided for in the party's political line? And you answered, that's exactly what I just told you. Enemy number one was Vietnamese. Enemy number two were people from the interior, from the inside. So I believe that in this question and answer, there's a link between the enemies and the cleansing of the enemies. So were there any concrete measures that were taken, concrete orders that were issued to the different vessel chiefs who were stationed around the islands each time a foreign boat would come into Cambodian territorial waters?
President, please hold on. Mr. Winesh, you have the floor now. Council Copper.
Thank you, Mr. President. The question is quite confusing, not only in the way it's formulated, but also put in the factual or rather legal context. You, or this trial chamber, has ruled in its decision, in its judgment against Duig, that there was an armed conflict between DK and Vietnam between 75 and 79. Whether it was indeed 75 or maybe rather 77 is maybe an issue for debate later. However, right now this is the situation. There was an armed conflict with Vietnam. The killing, or the shooting of Vietnamese combatants is in itself a lawful act. If there's war, unfortunately, soldiers shoot at each other, but that in itself is a lawful act. I think we can all agree on this. So by now asking a very general question as to what happened at sea without making a clear distinction between lawful acts within the armed conflict and potentially unlawful acts, that is killing of civilians or the killing of prisoners of war, that is something that should be kept in mind when the prosecution asks this question. And especially in relation to the events in the territorial sea, it is very important that we make this distinction and the prosecutor understands that distinction.
Mr. President, first I would like to put a question of general nature regarding instructions that were given vis-a-vis Vietnamese vessels. Well, witness, did any Vietnamese vessel coming into Cambodian territorial waters considered as an enemy based on the orders that you would receive from your superior?
Answer. To the best of my recollection, the division issued the orders to me to defend the territorial sea of Cambodia. And I received the order to prevent any Vietnamese boats from entering the territorial sea with any kinds of ambition. Particularly, I received the order to prevent the Vietnamese troop from entering the territorial sea. The orders made a mention about the time that specifically when I should went to patrol and defend the territorial sea.
Yesterday, you spoke about settling the issue of the capture of Thai boats by diplomatic means. Was there any kind of possibility of settling the issue with Vietnamese boats that were arrested at sea by diplomatic means?
Answer. These were the tasks to be performed by the upper level, since I did not understand the situation that they had to deal with. This is the true statement from me.
Hier, vous avez
Yesterday, you confirmed what you had said earlier during the CDCAM interview, notably that Vietnamese refugees, following investigations, were released after their boat had been seized or intercepted. I would basically say that many witnesses didn't say that the instructions varied depending on the types of Vietnamese, and they particularly didn't talk of the release of fishermen or Vietnamese refugees. In a record of interview, 2 TCW 1000 from the 140 regiment, he said in E319/23.3.44 in answer to question number 25 as follows, and I quote, free translation: if we saw ferries or boats in our territorial waters, we noted that would report the presence of the boat by radio communication. Then that would be reported to the regiment, and the regiment would in turn report to the division, and then the division would issue orders as to what we had to do with the boats and the people we had arrested. And then the battalion would issue orders to us: execute all the people arrested off the shores of Cambodia or on islands. When we arrested Vietnamese boats, we were sometimes ordered to open fire on the boats or to return the boats empty to the islands. If we arrested less than 20 persons, we had to execute them on the spot. If we arrested more than 20 persons, we had to send them to Ho Chi Minh. From what I know, all the people who were sent to the land all had to be executed. Those who were captured and sent to Kampong Som were killed and buried under durian or coconut trees. I witnessed firsthand 2 killing events. Once when they killed Vietnamese at sea and only the motorboat was taken, and once when they killed Vietnamese refugees on Ko Pulawai Island. End of quote. Some of it was free translation. I asked the question before. Objection? Mr. President, my objection has to do with part of the sentence that was uttered before. If I do not object now, then my objection would be pointless.
Yes, you may proceed, Defense Counsel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. There's one point which I would like to have clarified. I have no problem with the co-prosecutor quoting statements of a witness, but the foundations of the question, that is to say that numerous witnesses said this or that, but what I know is that only one witness has testified on this, and yet the prosecutor has referred to several witnesses. So I object to the use of the term several witnesses. 2TW 1000 is the only witness who gave this information before this chamber. So this question is not properly phrased because of the mention of several witnesses. Mr. Witness, I didn't say that it was a witness who appeared before this chamber. I know of a witness who made a statement before the OCIJ investigators, and so that is also a witness. So I would like to put my question to the witness again, following these remarks. The witness whose statement has just been read out said the question was not to know whether Vietnamese refugees would be released or not, but rather whether they were to be executed either at sea or on land, that is, on an island or at Kampong Som. Do you agree with what that witness told the OCIJ investigators?
The statement made by that witness and the related information in that statement is that I did not know about that information. If I did not know what happened at the time, at present I still say I do not know about that event or the information as stated in that statement.
À la réponse 29.
In answer to question number 29 of the record of interview, the witness says the following. The orders were clear on whether they were to be killed on the spot or sent ashore. If those persons captured were Vietnamese soldiers, we had to send them to the shore. Then they would broadcast their confessions via the national radio before they killed them. End of quote. At the very least, do you agree with what this witness says regarding the fate reserved for Vietnamese soldiers captured at sea and whose confessions had to be broadcast on the radio?
Objection à la formulation.
Court's indulgence, I object to the phrasing because I have a problem understanding the question. You're asking the witness to agree with what? I don't know how the witness is supposed to show his agreement with what you're saying, depending on the phrasing that you've given. I'm asking the witness to say whether, according to what other witnesses said, whether Vietnamese soldiers had to be sent ashore and whether their confessions had to be subsequently broadcast on the radio regarding the fate of Vietnamese soldiers. Do you agree with what that witness stated?
President, through my recollection, we allowed a process whereby the witness shall react to the statements that you quote in your questioning. And that is the common practice in this court. And when you ask whether the witness agrees with that statement, this is a leading question, and it should not be allowed in this court. You should ask for the reaction from the witness rather than to ask whether the witness agrees to that statement. And please try to adhere to the current practice before this chamber.
Quelle est votre réaction, monsieur le témoin?
How would you react, witness, to what that other witness stated regarding Vietnamese soldiers?
Witness. In response to the statement made by that witness, I can say that that is the account of that individual, and for me, I am not in a position to say whether I knew or concur with the statement made by that witness.
Bien, alors je vais citer ce que...
Very well. I'll quote what you said regarding the refugees. Inter alia, in your statement before DCCAM E3/913 in Khmer 00926384. And let me quote in English what you stated at the time.
There were some boats entering our territory. When I went to check, they were Vietnamese boats. Question by Danny. What did you do? Sarat, we arrested them. Danny, where were they sent to? Sarat, some of them were refugees and some were youth in their commando uniforms. A little further, we arrested and interrogated them. We released the refugees. If they did not answer our questions and tried to hide their identity, we would send them to our security office. End of quote. Et ensuite, vous précisez que...
You go on to specify that we're referring to S21 in Phnom Penh. How many times did your boat face such situations? Situations which you had to follow orders and arrest and or capture Vietnamese boats. How often did you face such a situation?
What I said during my interview and the statement that you just quote from that interview is that is merely the information that I received, and it was not my personal involvement or my encounter during my patrol. I only referred to the information provided by those who were stationing at the various islands, that on a particular day or a particular night, when there was a Vietnamese boat encroaching the Cambodian territorial waters, the forces on the island would take measure against them, either to seize them and send them on shore, or a similar action was taken. This is the information I received, and it is not the action that I personally involved in. President, thank you. And I'd like to remind the co-prosecutors and the lead co-lawyers that you only have another session this morning. We will take a short break now and resumed at 10:30. Court officer, please assist the witness during the break time and invite him as well as his duty counsel back into the courtroom at 10:30. The court is now in recess.